The Brain Simulator 2, representing knowledge in neurons. In this video, I'll show how clusters of neurons can store knowledge. I appreciate your taking the few minutes to watch this video. If you agree with me that the idea of a knowledge graph implemented in neurons is promising, I hope you'll subscribe, like, and share this video with your colleagues. Computer, what is red?
Red is a color.
Neural networks currently have the AI spotlight, but the field of knowledge representation has also played a prominent role in AI. But suppose you could implement a knowledge graph in neurons. This video introduces how I created such a graph with the Brain Simulator 2. After describing how I created this system, I'll briefly address the questions of computational efficiency and biological plausibility. A knowledge graph is a collection of nodes which are connected by edges, which represent relationships. For example, we might have a node representing the concept of blue and another representing color, connected by an edge which it means is a, indicating that blue is a color, but not the other way around. We might consider a more general parent-child relationship with the possibility of its being a many-to-many relationship in both directions. So here are some questions I wanted my neural network knowledge graph to be able to answer. How can I do this with neurons? If you think of a node as being a neuron with edges being synapses, you'll get the general idea. But it's not that simple. Synapses are one-way signaling devices, so to represent a parent-child relationship requires multiple synapses, one from the parent going to the child and one from the child going to the parent. But we can't have the input and output be the same neuron. If you did, you couldn't tell which was the source of the relationship and which was the target because you just see firing neurons, not the synapse direction. So I add different but linked neurons at each end of any edge. But you still can't tell which relationship is being queried, so I add more synapses which inhibit the firing of all but the desired relationship. I show inhibitory synapses in black and excitatory synapses in red. With this general idea, if the color neuron fires, if I allow the child-enabling neuron to fire, I can learn that blue is a child of the color neuron. It has taken me 6 neurons to represent a single parent-child relationship, but that's okay because we have billions of neurons to work with. On the upside, I can query relationships in parallel in the time it takes to fire just 2 neurons, regardless of the number of nodes and relationships in the graph. So instead of being a single neuron, a node is a cluster of neurons. How many? That depends on the number of different relationships we'd like to represent. Here's what I've implemented so far. Parent-child relationships, attributes, which can be searched by all of or any of, sequences represented by next and head pointers, and recursion. At this time, each node is 17 neurons, but I've not tried to optimize the neuron count. I have lots of neurons available. You might ask why my sequences have next connections but no previous connection. You only need to try to say the alphabet backwards to convince yourself that your brain has only forward connections for sequential data. What does recursion mean in this context? In this case, recursion is the ability to transfer the output of a relationship back to the input so the process can repeat. That way you can have any depth of parent-child relationships, for example. In the brain simulator, the graph becomes a rectangular array of neurons. Each row in the graph represents a single node. Across the top of the array is a row of control neurons. Firing one of these enables the relationship represented by the column below it. The graph is initialized with a lot of what I call static framework neurons. These are necessary to the operation of the graph, but are independent of the information within the graph. Interestingly, these synapses are nearly all either vertical or horizontal in the graph array. Then I add a bit of test knowledge, and you can see the diagonal synapses, which are relationships. I have added a neuron representing the concept of color, and neurons representing red and blue, which are children of the color neuron. Here's how it works. If I want to know the parent of a blue neuron, I fire the blue neuron and then the parent neuron, and the color output neuron fires. I can fire the recursion neuron to transfer the outputs to the inputs. Then to know the children of the color neuron, with the color neuron still firing, I fire the child neuron and the blue and red output neurons fire. This was all pretty tedious until I connected the speech module so I could give voice commands and clean up the speech output a bit. This speech function isn't really part of the knowledge graph, but it gives an idea of how things can work. Computer, what is red?
Red is a color.
Computer, name some colors.
Red and blue are colors.
Sequential information is significantly more complex, as I described in the previous video on the capabilities and limitations of neurons. For this implementation, I added the ability to search within sequences with the input received at an unknown rate. This required 5 additional neurons per node to represent a single next sequential link because of the need to represent a state within the search. For demonstration, I've added a few digits and the sequences 54321 and pi. Computer, what is pi?
Pi is 3.14159.
Computer, sequence containing 141.
3.14159.
Computer, sequence containing 32.
54321.
Since everything within the graph is simply arbitrary information, the system can equally search for phrases or other objects. Computer, sequence containing little lamb.
Mary had a little lamb.
Computer, sequence containing Mary had.
Mary had a little lamb.
So each node is a row or cluster of neurons representing the different possible relationships. But where's the knowledge? Here's the kicker. In a typical AI knowledge graph, each node or edge contains some sort of information. In this neuron knowledge graph, all the knowledge is external or contextual. The blue node is only the blue node if it is connected to a neuron which fires if you see the color blue or hear the word blue. Likewise, when it fires, the output neuron is connected to others which can say the word blue. So these synapses, which connect the graph to other things, are the ones which give the graph its meaning. Within the graph itself, everything is just neuron bits with no inherent meaning at all. I have put labels on the neurons just as one would put comments in computer code, because without the labels I could never debug the graph. But the labels are not used while searching the graph. But I do use the labels to add information to the graph, and I add test data to the graph with a single C# function, addThing. All of these parameter strings refer to neuron labels, but could equally refer to currently firing neurons. Synapses are added with a single function, addSynapse, which adds a single synapse from the source neuron to the destination neuron with a given weight. Again, I refer to columns by name so I can keep track of them while developing the program. So adding a parent-child relationship requires just 2 instructions. Now a word about computational efficiency. One beauty of this system is that if it is constructed from parallel real neurons, the search time is constant regardless of the number of items in the graph or the graph complexity. It varies only with the number of search terms. Since I am simulating this graph on a sequential computer, processing time probably increases linearly with the number of nodes in the graph. I'd like also to talk about biological plausibility of this model. First, the idea that clusters of some number of neurons might represent nodes of knowledge doesn't seem far-fetched at all. In the program, some neurons are critical to the operation of the graph, and I would presume that the brain starts with perhaps 100 neurons per node for redundancy and reliability. Because not every node has every relationship, many of the neurons in the graph never fire. In biology, these unused neurons might be removed from their node and repurposed to other nodes. It is this observation that means that adding a new relationship type only adds neurons to the nodes which use that particular relationship. This means that your brain could support a graph of very high complexity. My brute force method of adding information to the graph is a bit of a stretch, but I can see how I could modify it to be more like Hebbian learning, which adds information to the graph based on the frequency of occurrence of its inputs. I appreciate your taking the time to watch this video. If you agree with me that the idea of a knowledge graph implemented in neurons is promising, I hope you'll subscribe, like, and share this video with your colleagues. If you think some other algorithm might be more appropriate, please let me know in the comments below so I can try it out as well. For more on this timely topic, read my new book, Will Computers Revolt? Preparing for the Future of Artificial Intelligence. Available now at Amazon and book retailers worldwide in paperback, hardcover, and ebook editions.